The four men Marlon Brando had affairs with were made public. With his unvarnished, visceral performances, Marlon Brando revolutionized American acting, crafting enduring characters in movies such as The Godfather, On the Waterfront, and A Streetcar Named Desire. Hollywood was obliged to adopt a new, more genuine performing style as a result of his groundbreaking approach to his trade, which permanently altered the film industry. Brando's professional influence as the first movie rebel is still undeniable. Beyond his creative legacy, however, is another, more intimate revolution that calls into question how we perceive this cultural figure and the time period in which he lived. In a time when such candor could ruin even the most illustrious career, Brando maintained a complicated and purposefully ambiguous relationship with his own sexuality throughout his life, occasionally making controversial remarks while cautiously avoiding definitive labels. Marlon was not convinced. A former assistant who worked closely with the actor in the 1970s was disclosed in sexual categories. It wasn't a political statement when he once told me, "Desire doesn't understand gender, it just understands attraction." It was just the way he lived his life. The meticulously preserved lines separating Brando's private and public lives have progressively blurred in the decades after his passing in 2004, revealing a more comprehensive image of the man. We've started to comprehend the full complexity of Brando's private life, which included important relationships with men in addition to his more well-known relationships with women, thanks to revelations from people who knew him, posthumous biographies, and the sporadic confirmation of long-rumored relationships. According to celebrity historian Thomas Henderson, what most people don't realize about Brando is that his sexuality was just as rebellious and boundary-pushing as his acting, even if it meant encoding a large portion of his reality in ambiguous language and private behavior. Brando refused to play by the rules at a time when acknowledging same-sex attraction meant his career was doomed. Today, we look at four important connections that shed light on this little-known facet of Brando's life. Relationships that go beyond easy classification, from verified liaisons to intensely personal, emotional ties. These connections, which span decades of the actor's life, show not only personal appeals, but also a groundbreaking method of human connection that was as far ahead of its time as Brando's revolutionary method of acting. More than just new eras in Marlon Brando's love past are exposed by his interactions with men. They offer vital information on the remarkable intricacy of a guy who, in every area of his life, pushed the boundaries of convention. Brando's readiness to seek genuine relationships, regardless of gender, was a kind of personal rebellion as important as his professional innovations, during a time when homosexuality was still considered a mental illness and could quickly ruin even the most prosperous Hollywood career. These relationships were not ancillary to Brando's identity, rather, they were essential components of a life governed by his own principles, rather than those of society. Brando's relationships with men reveal not only his personal tastes but also his lifelong rejection of arbitrary constraints on human experience. These relationships range from strong emotional ties that went beyond traditional friendship to documented physical affairs that defied the strict sexual classifications of the time. We can better comprehend an idol whose inner complexity matched his public genius by examining these connections with the nuance they merit. No, I simply wanted to give that a shot for a time. Give yourself a break after 20 years, you know. Richard Pryor, the unanticipated link. The confirmation of Marlon Brando's brief but intense romance with comedian Richard Pryor in the 1970s is arguably the most shocking discovery about his private life that has surfaced since his passing. This surprising relationship between two of the most innovative people in entertainment was kept a secret for decades until it was verified in 2018 by a person who knew Pryor well, not by rumors or conjecture. The comic indeed. The unanticipated source of this plain confirmation was Jennifer Lee Pryor, the widow of Richard Pryor, who addressed allegations of the affair with direct admission rather than denial or evasion. Her casual affirmation turned what could have been written off as celebrity rumors into fact. compelling a re-examination of men's private lives and public identities. Quincy Jones, a music producer, first made the news when he casually brought up the romance in a comprehensive 2018 interview with Vulture magazine. Jones simply said that Brando would anything when questioned about his sexual orientation. He had a mailbox: Marvin Gaye, Richard Pryor, and James Baldwin. The name of Pryor was unexpectedly confirmed, even though some of these assertions were denied by estates or remained unsubstantiated. According to entertainment journalist Rebecca Santos, Pryor's own widow, Jennifer Lee Pryor, verified this in 2018. Jones confirmed her remarks in a statement to TMZ and later social media posts. Instead of ignoring them as many had anticipated, she said that Pryor had been open about his sexuality with individuals close to him. In addition to the fact that the affair had taken place, Jennifer Lee's affirmation contained crucial background information that framed the connection in the context of Los Angeles culture in the 1970s. She portrayed the affair as a part of the free-spirited exploration that defined both men's outlook on life at the time, rather than as scandalous or embarrassing. She claimed that Pryor had a brief but intense sexual encounter with Brando and that he was openly bisexual in the 1970s. This wasn't just confirmation of a single encounter, but acknowledgement of an ongoing connection between two men who, despite their public heterosexual relationships, privately acknowledged broader sexual interests. Santos went on. The post-Stonewall pre-AIDS era created a brief window where sexual exploration flourished in certain circles, especially among artists and entertainers who already existed somewhat outside conventional social boundaries. Jennifer Lee placed the affair within the cultural moment of 1970s Hollywood, stating, "Drugs were still good and sex was free. It was the 1970s." This framing helps explain how two major celebrities could engage in what would have been considered career-ending behavior just 10 years earlier. Relationship is especially important for comprehending both men because it challenges oversimplified accounts of their public personas while confirming our understanding of their defiant approaches to social norms. Brando and Pryor both established careers that defied expectations, with Brando doing so through his innovative acting style and unwavering nonconformity. People had put both men in heterosexual boxes based on their public relationships with women, making it hard to accept evidence that contradicted these simplistic categories. Pryor through comedy that confronted America's racial hypocrisy with unprecedented honesty. Most fans still don't believe it, but insiders swear it happened, Santos said. This skepticism reveals more about the public's rigid understanding of sexuality than it does about the relationship itself. However, for those who were aware of both men's personal histories, the confirmation only confirmed what many had long suspected, that both Brando and Pryor approached sexuality with the same boundary-pushing attitude they brought to their respective arts. Brando had made multiple statements throughout his career that suggested a fluid approach to sexual attraction, while Pryor's autobiography and personal writings revealed a man who rejected limiting labels. Their relationship came at a time when both men were going through particularly significant life changes. Pryor was changing from a relatively mainstream comedian to the groundbreaking voice he would become with albums like That Nigger's Crazy and Bicentennial Niger, while Brando was moving from the career resurgence of The Godfather and Last Tango in Paris toward the more eccentric later phase of his career. This straightforward statement sums up the cultural setting that enabled their affair, the 1970s, when traditional boundaries were being questioned throughout American society, especially within the artistic communities of New York and Los Angeles. Drugs were still good and sex was free. The Brando-Pryor affair, as brief as it seems to have been, represents more than just an unexpected celebrity connection. For men like Brando and Pryor who had always chafed against societal constraints, this era offered unprecedented freedom to pursue authentic desires without the rigid categorization that previous decades had demanded. I'll take my chances on the track. They say racing is dangerous, but I'll choose authentic personal expression over the safety of conformity, just as they had done throughout their revolutionary careers. It reveals how two cultural icons navigated the complex terrain of sexuality and identity during a transitional moment in American history. Few Hollywood relationships have generated more persistent speculation than the alleged connection between Marlon Brando and James Dean in the early 1950s, despite the fact that Brando never confirmed it, and that it was impossible to confirm following Dean's tragic death in 1955. According to film historian Margaret Collins, their lives coincided in the early 1950s, a crucial period in American cinema history, with Brando already established as the most exciting new talent in the business after A Streetcar Named Desire, and Dean still striving for his breakthrough role that would come with it. This rumored relationship has endured in Hollywood lore, less because of tangible evidence than because it suggests a compelling psychological dynamic between two of cinema's most influential rebels. The timing of East of Eden in 1955 created a huge power imbalance. Dean, at 24, was still trying to get the credit he deserved for his talent, while Brando, at 30, was already a revolutionary figure in American acting. This professional difference reportedly served as the basis for a complex personal dynamic that several biographers have described as both manipulation and mentoring. Collins went on to say that a number of biographers contend that Brando controlled Dean both sexually and emotionally as part of a perverse mentorship relationship. According to these accounts, what started out as professional admiration on Dean's part turned into something more intimate and intense, with Brando allegedly realizing and taking advantage of Dean's attraction to him. Most accounts of their relationship revolve around Dean's well-documented fascination with Brando. Friends and co-workers from this era consistently describe Dean's nearly obsessive study of Brando's acting technique, personal style, and public persona. This influence was so strong that early in Dean's career, critics often dismissed him as merely a Brando imitator rather than an original talent. It is disputed whether Brando reciprocated this interest in any meaningful way, or if it was merely a means of exerting control over a young actor who idolized him. Several sources from this era describe Dean's constant discussion of Brando, his unusually intense study of his performances, and even his adoption of some of his speech patterns and mannerisms. Collins noted that Dean was said to be obsessed with Brando, and Brando allegedly played with him. Carlo Fiore, Brando's longtime friend who lived with Brando during this time and later wrote about seeing interactions between the two actors, is one of the most often cited sources about the relationship. Although Fiore never confirmed a sexual relationship, he described situations that suggested unusual intimacy and emotional intensity. In particular, Dean used Dean as a mirror to reflect his own chaos. This statement, ascribed to a contemporary who knew both men, encapsulates the psychological dynamic that most biographers have highlighted. Regardless of the physical relationship, the emotional bond was marked by Brando's narcissism and Dean's desperate need for approval. Virtually every biographer of either man has discussed the rumored relationship despite the lack of conclusive evidence. The fact that these accounts have persisted over decades of scholarship suggests something more substantial than mere gossip, even though concrete proof is still elusive. No proof, Collins said, but every Hollywood biographer includes this rumor because it never died. Sometimes the lack of smoking gun evidence does not negate a pattern of consistent testimonies from contemporaries who observed the relationship firsthand. Dean's early death permanently prevented his perspective from being recorded. When a rumor endures this long and appears in so many credible accounts, historians must ask why. Throughout his life, Brando remained ambiguous about personal matters, and when questioned about Dean in interviews, he usually acknowledged his talent, but distanced himself from any meaningful personal connection, implying that he hardly knew the younger actor despite a wealth of evidence to the contrary. Why is this alleged relationship so significant, Bay? If reports of their relationship are accurate, it reveals not only private behavior but also the psychological strain of upholding public personas that are fundamentally at odds with private desires. This is how celebrity gossip can shed light on the complex power dynamics of 1950s Hollywood. particularly for actors navigating same-sex attraction in at a time when exposure meant career death. He used Dean as a mirror to reflect his own chaos. This observation encapsulates the essence of what most accounts suggest about their dynamic. Regardless of any physical dimension, the psychological component involved Brando identifying aspects of his own rebellious nature in Dean and alternately encouraging and rejecting this reflection based on his own emotional needs rather than any sincere concern for Dean's well-being. If this pattern is correct, it would align with what we know about Brando's complex relationship style throughout his life, a capacity to build strong bonds while maintaining a fundamentally self-centered approach, with others acting more as mirrors for his own emotional experience than as genuine partners in vulnerability. Marlon Brando's lifelong relationship with actor Wally Cox defies easy classification more thoroughly than any other relationship in his life. From childhood until Cox's death in 1973, this bond transcended traditional definitions of friendship, creating an intimacy so profound that it raises questions about the arbitrary boundaries we draw between different types of human connection. This relationship is called underdog. Brando literally kept a daily physical connection with Cox long after his death, keeping his cremated remains on his bedside table for decades and reportedly talking to them on a regular basis. When Brando himself passed away in 2004, one of his last wishes was that their ashes be mixed together and scattered in Death Valley. Biographer Thomas Henderson noted that Cox was his soulmate and that he kept his ashes in his bedroom, a request that caused legal issues but highlights the unique significance of this relationship. Their relationship began when they were schoolboys in Libertyville, Illinois, and grew up with Brando, the physically strong, emotionally unstable son of alcoholic parents, and Cox, the small, bright child who would go on to play quiet, apprehensive roles on television. This unlikely friendship would last for over 50 years, enduring Brando's quick ascent to fame, several marriages, and the geographical distances brought about by their respective careers. What set this friendship apart from other friendships was the emotional depth of Brando's attachment to it, which he occasionally expressed in surprisingly open terms. Henderson added, "If Wally had been a woman, I would have married him," a statement he made after Cox's passing that shows how Brando himself struggled with societal language limitations in describing their connection. The frameworks available in mid-20th century America, just friends or lovers, failed to capture the complex reality of their bond. This is unusual for a man who usually maintained careful ambiguity about his intimate life. Henderson noted that although they were not sexual in the traditional sense, the intimacy level was so high that many believe it crossed into romantic and possibly physical territory. Those who knew both men said their relationship had aspects of intellectual stimulation, emotional support, and physical affection that went beyond the typical male friendship of their time without necessarily fitting the definition of a sexual partnership. When Cox unexpectedly passed away in 1973 from a heart attack, Brando was devastated in a manner typically associated with the loss of a spouse rather than a friend. Their contemporaries described them finishing each other's sentences, having phone conversations for hours on end, and exhibiting physical affection that surpassed the typical male friendship of their generation. Their relationship is further complicated by the contrast between Cox's and Brando's public personas. Cox developed a career playing mild-mannered, frequently effeminate characters, most notably on the television series Mr. Peepers in the 1950s and 1960s, while Brando projected raw sexuality and rebellious intensity. This apparent opposition may have created a complementary dynamic that allowed each man to access aspects of himself not easily expressed through his public identity. There was a completeness they seemed to find in each other's company that neither found elsewhere, despite Brando's many romantic relationships and marriages. They were inseparable, and whatever it was, it went deeper than friendship, said a contemporary who knew both men. With Cox, Brando displayed a vulnerability and ease rarely seen in his other interactions. Their bond suggests the possibility of intimate attachment that doesn't neatly fit into available terminology, but nevertheless represents one of life's most meaningful connections, which is what makes this relationship particularly important in understanding Brando, because it challenges the rigid categories often imposed on human connection, especially for men of their generation. Perhaps the most tangible proof of the relationship's extraordinary significance in Brando's life is his possession of Cox's ashes, which he allegedly obtained against Cox's widow's wishes. Several sources claim that Brando spent the last 30 years of his life with the ashes in his bedroom, occasionally speaking to them as though Cox could hear him. Whatever it was, they were inseparable, and it was more than friendship. This statement encapsulates the fundamental aspect of their relationship, which defied classification while continuing to be, in Brando's own opinion, one of the most significant relationships of his life. Whether it is characterized as elevated friendship, non-sexual romantic attachment, or something else for which we have no suitable term, the Brando-Cox relationship illustrates the potential depth of same-sex bonding that exists outside of our narrow cultural frameworks. While most of Marlon Brando's complicated personal life has slowly come to light in the decades since his passing, one relationship which those closest to the actor say is possibly the most emotionally significant of his adult life remains cloaked in purposeful mystery. This is the hidden heartbreak, the unnamed European actor, the one who broke him. The fact that Brando only mentioned this relationship in coded journal entries and infrequent private conversations provides a compelling, if shadowy, picture of the man who allegedly had a deeper impact on Brando than his many public relationships, according to his assistant, explained celebrity biographer Thomas Henderson. Sources familiar with Brando's private writings say that the relationship involved an unnamed European actor whom Brando met while filming abroad in the late 1950s, but it was almost entirely hidden from public view. Unlike his relationships with women, which he discussed relatively openly despite his general privacy. Nevertheless, those who knew him well understood its profound significance in his emotional life. According to Henderson, who quoted Brando's private writings, this connection was described as tender, cruel, unforgettable, in contrast to most of Brando's romantic relationships, which usually portrayed him as the pursued rather than the pursuer. This one apparently reversed the dynamic that Brando had become used to in his relationships. According to those familiar with Brando's private life, the unique power dynamic that this relationship created made it particularly significant in his life. These descriptors suggest an emotional complexity that went beyond physical attraction, a connection that engaged Brando both emotionally and intellectually in ways that most of his relationships did not. Henderson, who was reportedly the only person Brando ever pursued, noted that throughout his adult life, his extraordinary fame and sexual magnetism usually put him in the dominant position in his relationships, with others vying for his attention and affection rather than the other way around. This reversal of his typical romantic pattern apparently created an unprecedented vulnerability for Brando, an emotional exposure he rarely experienced in other relationships, where his status as the desired party provided a certain protection against. According to those close to Brando during this time, the relationship ended when the European actor started seeing a woman, causing a rejection that had a far deeper impact on him than anyone would have anticipated given his generally aloof attitude toward romance. The experience left an emotional scar that never completely healed, affecting Brando's approach to intimacy for decades afterward. According to rumors, Brando was devastated when the man left him for a woman. Henderson went on. This desertion allegedly led to intense emotions of rejection and inadequacy that ran counter to Brando's public persona as the ultimate object of desire. Despite his exceptional beauty and notoriety, he was unable to maintain this specific relationship, which resulted in a narcissistic injury that affected him throughout his later life. This relationship's date aligns with a discernible change in Brando's public demeanor and career decisions, moving from the intensely focused early career to the more unpredictable and self-destructive patterns that defined his later work. Although there were several reasons for this change, people who knew his personal background believe that the emotional fallout from this specific connection was a major one. After that, Brando was never the same. His fury became more audible. A longtime associate noticed that his heart became quieter. His approach to his profession and interactions with others underwent a significant shift, a retreat into emotional self-defense that showed up as growing eccentricity, erratic behavior, and disengagement from the artistic fervor that had characterized his early career. Its ongoing emotional significance throughout the actor's life is demonstrated by the purposeful obscurity surrounding this relationship, with the man's identity never disclosed even in Brando's private documents. This relationship was tightly guarded, a private wound too delicate to expose to public scrutiny, in contrast to many of his affairs, which he acknowledged with relative candor among friends or even occasionally in interviews. After that, Brando was never the same. His heart grew quieter as his anger increased. This comment encapsulates the relationship's fundamental influence, not merely a romantic letdown, but a life-changing emotional encounter that changed Brando's basic perspective on connection and vulnerability. Following this rejection, the man who had transformed acting via emotional authenticity apparently distanced himself from his own personal truth, resulting in the increasingly bizarre and purposefully provocative public persona that defined his later decades. What? Because it defies the widespread belief that Brando is emotionally cold or incapable of showing true vulnerability. This hidden bond is especially important to comprehending him. This experience suggests a capacity for deep emotional investment that he purposefully concealed beneath layers of provocative behavior and studied indifference, protecting himself from further rejection by preemptively rejecting authentic connection. Despite his reputation for treating relationships casually, the work of Marlon Brando relationships with men exposed aspects of his personality that enhance rather than undermine our understanding of this multifaceted cultural figure. Despite societal taboos and industry demands, Brando remained essentially consistent throughout his life, rejecting artificial boundaries, questioning conventional expectations, and insisting on true experience. His approach to human connection was shaped by the same revolutionary spirit that revolutionized American acting via unadulterated emotional truth, resulting in a personal life as boundary-pushing as his advances in the workplace. Examining these connections reveals a more comprehensive image of a guy who rejected easy classification in every area of his life, not a secret identity. When it came to sexuality, Brando didn't just accept the odd same-sex attraction as an anomaly. He pursued partnerships based on personal resonance rather than social approbation, rejecting the entire structure that divided human ties into inflexible categories. Brando's method put him decades ahead of the current knowledge of relationship diversity and sexual flexibility. Brando lived by his own internal compass long before contemporary debates about the extent of human sexuality, establishing relationships that went beyond traditional notions of friendship or romance, and included everything from passionate sexual encounters to emotional ties. His well-known claim that homosexuality is so commonplace that it no longer makes news was a reflection of his sincere belief in the arbitrary nature of sexual classifications rather than just a provocation. Most importantly, these connections help to explain why Brando is still so fascinating and mysterious even after his passing. His personal life was influenced by the same genuineness that revolutionized his performances, resulting in a unique alignment between lived experience and artistic expression. Brando pursued truth in both spheres, embracing the personal and professional risks that such sincerity involved, in contrast to many performers who kept a strict division between their private and public selves. As we continue to reevaluate cultural icons in light of modern knowledge, Brando's views on relationships and sexuality seem more prevalent than scandalous, less a secret than a facet of his personality that society was unable to adequately acknowledge during his lifetime. The individual who transformed the way actors portrayed emotional truth on television lived that same truth off-screen, leaving a legacy of genuine self-expression that defies easy categorization and keeps pushing the boundaries of our knowledge of human connection in all its nuanced, boundary-pushing manifestations.